Best of After Dark at 4, TX22-1, recorded 811, segment 1.
Welcome to After Dark. Let's get down to business now. Tonight it is my pleasure to introduce to you some of the people that were interviewed last year on After Dark, not by myself, but by Glenn A. Bacon. We thank him for filling in, what did he do? Oh, about 10 weeks. I kept having illnesses and things last year. It was incredible. Kept getting suspended like jockeys. The guests that Glenn A. spoke to were Stevie Wright, Lex Marinos, Shannon, Glenn Shorrock, about the time he went out on his own too, Jimmy Barnes, Ostentatious. Now, these two I was pleased enough to interview, and very pleased to interview. Ian McRae, I also spoke to, Digger Revell and Gracie Knight out of the Eurogliders. They're all coming up on tonight's After Dark. And Flash Gordon, tonight's show, Human Bait. We're going to dangle him on a line. Let's start with Elvis Costello, and then an oldie, Thunderclap Newman. Butte song. Stick around. After Dark. Thanks for joining.
Listen, I wanted you to cast your mind back to November 4, 1979 on the steps of Sydney Opera House, which is, I think that's the last point that most people actually saw you. And that day you were responsible for more tears than the funeral of a king when you sang Evie in front of 100,000 people. And to my mind, that event underlined the enormous depth of feeling that a great many Australians have for you. And it almost seems that a whole generation grew up with Stevie Wright, back from the days of the Easybeats. Do you find that a comfortable sort of a position to be in?
And I can understand it. It's those people that are still alive that were around in the 60s probably do identify with me, and they've probably had their troubles too and kind of battled them out, and I guess that they've probably told their younger brothers and sisters about it all. And yes, I do feel there's identification. It's not too hard a responsibility to carry, no.
Were you surprised when actually you went out in front of those kids, many of whom were 13 and 14, and saw them responding the same age as did people of our age?
Well, I thought they probably wouldn't know who I was, but I thought they might remember the song, and that was the attitude that I went out there with. It was the concert of the decade and all the best songs of the decade, and I went out to do as good a job on Evie as I could.
Now, you were 16 when you joined the Easybeats, and essentially you've lived most of your sort of adult life as, you know, inside that sort of vacuum of pop. And the pressures that having 8 consecutive top five hits, how does that come down on somebody who was 16 years of age? How do you in fact bear up to that?
Well, from what happened later in my life, I didn't sort of bear up to it very well. At the time, it was great. I was a teenager, and what better kind of life could a teenager have than to have the adulation of sort of thousands, you know? It was fantastic. I loved it, and I tried to treat it as in the best spirit as possible. Yeah.
Now, during the 60s, I remember that like pop personalities had to very carefully protect their image so that little girls wouldn't be offended. And in fact, remember, members of the Easybeats had to in fact lie about the fact that they were married. Did you have to go through that sort of a problem?
I never had to lie that I was married.
No, I realise that.
But yeah, we were kind of trained to be exclusive, right? You didn't sort of go out in the town on Friday night if you weren't working, so the other bands couldn't see that you didn't have a gig. Right. And also it was very important. It was a pop-orientated musical scene then, and there were a lot of, perhaps mainly females, buying singles and product, right, and coming to gigs. So you really had to cater for the female audience, and in those days it wasn't sort of cool to be married or to have a girlfriend.
Everybody knows my name. I'm a black guy. The black guy. The black guy.
I've been working as an actress for 12 years or so. So you're...
Yeah. Is there a living to be made in doing... I mean, we know, you know, the Kingswood Country thing, which we'll talk about in a minute, but is there a living to be made in doing bits and pieces like that on television for an Australian actor?
Well, yeah, it's just jobbing around. There's a reasonable living. It's not terrific. Okay. Actors don't make a lot of money, generally. Primarily, television work subsidises work in theatre because for all you hear about subsidy in theatre, the real subsidy comes from the people who work in it because they work under fairly appalling conditions for very little money. So there's, you piece it all together, you make a living, yeah.
Now, the Kingswood Country series is sort of has thrust you from, from cult status and obscurity
real
to
mediocrity.
yeah. And I mean, it must be terrible. You must get recognised in supermarkets and on buses and doing all that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I quite like that. It's usually kids yell out from buses as the bus goes past that happens.
What, things like, hey, are you...
Oh, they usually yell out, leave the money on the fridge.
Fix that. What? Bloody wrong! Where are you? Here. Oh, give him there.
How's it going?
Mind your own business. It's on. Now go home.
Hang on, just a minute. I've got to drink my beer and have a meal first.
Well, hurry up.
All right.
Whose line is it?
I think it was mine.
Bloody hell, Phil, I can't get it out. Story of me life.
Your first hit really came out of nowhere, and it had that extraordinary, what at the time appeared to be like a farfisa organ sound, but was not an organ. I mean, the classic Runaway sound. Can you tell me how that sound came
Well, that sound was put together by Max Crook, Maximilian, who came in. My guitar player was quitting. I was working in Battle Creek, Michigan. It's a terrible place to live, and I needed another instrumentalist, to take my guitar player's place. My drummer said, "Oh, there's this guy, man, and he's got this little box, and he plays it, and he also plays with the one hand that, and he plays the piano with the other hand." He said, "It's electronics," and I said, "I don't know about that. I never even heard of electronics in those days, really." And he brought him in one night, and he set him on. He had this little box like this, about like this big, and he had it all camouflaged, all kinds of lines and all kinds of knobs, which he never even used. He didn't want anybody to copy it, And he put it on his piano, played it with his left hand. He played the piano, and he would play this little thing. And when he played it, it sounded like a whole orchestra behind me in those days.
Yeah, right.
It sounded like strings. And I said, "You are hired, my friend." And I hired him immediately. And he never drank, never smoked. He used to bring his own cookies and his own Kool-Aid to the gig every night. We used to work 4 nights a week there. And he used to, and when he wasn't playing his other thing, he had his little portable radio in his ear listening to the ball game. He was a baseball freak. So Max was an amazing fellow, and I think it was one of the first electronic machines used on record.
The forerunner of the synthesizer.